Welcome to Conquering Your Clownfish, a podcast dedicated to transforming disabilities into special abilities. I'm your host, Brady Murray. Welcome to the Conquering Your Clownfish podcast. I am honored to present my remarkable guest today, Amy Jandrisevits. As the founder of A Doll Like Me, a 501c3 nonprofit, Amy's vision stems from the belief that our unique differences enhance our beauty. The core mission of this organization is to ensure that children can see themselves reflected in the toys they play with. Amy crafts dolls and distributes them to wonderful children across the globe and continues to tell the child's story in the process. Amy, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
This is going to be a lot of fun. So I have to share a fun fact about you that you just barely shared with me that I think is so awesome. You said this truly was a gift of love when accepting your new last name, because you went from Davis to Jandrisevits. That's right. A big one.
Right. I know. I'm like, that is totally an act of love.
That is so fun. So this is a special episode. And the reason why is I think we've done over 40 episodes now. And I honestly don't know if we've had a guest that doesn't have a child or someone very close to them, a brother or sister, that has a disability. And in this case, you don't. Yet you are serving this community in a way that is so unique, that is so special in the sense of it's a very creative idea, but you are making a difference in these people's lives. So this is going to be a fun opportunity to be able to really explore how in the world did this inspiration come and just the story behind that. So Amy, this is going to be a great episode.
Cool. Well, I have to correct you because I like to think that I actually have like thousands of kids all over the world.
Beautiful.
I mean, these are truly, when you hear their stories, I feel some sense of like obligation to share these kids. And so I actually have lots of kids all over the world.
Amy, I think that is a very, very important point to make. And I think for anybody that followed you on Instagram or really understands your story, and for those that are going to listen to this podcast, they will see that you are exactly right, that this is a labor of love. And you do have thousands of children that are in a very special way your own through this amazing service and gift that you're giving them. So way excited. This is going to be super cool. So let's start. Tell us a little bit about what you do and then share with us how all this came about.
So, I mean, the nutshell answer is I make dolls for kids who don't see themselves on the store shelves. So if we were to take some of the kids that I work with, if we were to take them shopping, we couldn't go to a toy store and say, you know what, this one looks just like you. And so those are the kids that I get to work with. And I custom make dolls that look like they do because, let me back up a second. So I have a master's degree in social work, and I started my social work career in pediatric oncology. And when you're working with very young children, you don't ask them, hey, so what's going on in your life? They tell you through play. I mean, their lives have been turned upside down in sometimes less than 24 hours. And it's a really scary thing. And so one of the ways that you can help kids, particularly in the hospital, is play therapy with dolls. So that I could say, pretend that this is you. Here's what they're going to do when they take you back. And you can't tell a kid, pretend this is you, when it doesn't look anything like them.
Yeah.
Right. And so for me, there was this kind of disconnect between what I could offer the kids and how they actually looked, particularly then when they get further in their treatment and they don't have hair, or they have, a feeding tube, or they have, scars. And then to put, let's say it's a child of color, to put a princess doll with long blonde hair on their lap and say, we're going to pretend that this is you. There's this serious disconnect. And I think that for most kids, actually, I could say definitively all kids with differences, you can't just go into the store and say, we're going to find a doll that looks like you. And so I think back then I knew that was a problem, but I didn't realize how powerful seeing yourself could actually be until I created A Doll Like Me.
Well, I also wanted to ask, you also have a love for dolls. That was something
Totally.
that stemmed back as well. Could you share about that?
Sure. And so, I mean, I've played with dolls, and I played with dolls probably to the point where it was no longer so socially acceptable. I mean, I played with dolls a long time. And so this is kind of like my way of still playing with dolls.
I think that's a good idea.
And so I have three kids, and they've played with dolls as they were growing up. They can go into the store and see themselves. And I remember, and this is such an interesting story, my husband and I um, believe in diversity. We've always exposed the kids to, different abilities, different races. But I remember when my littlest is 9 now. And I remember when she first saw a princess movie, the first words out of her mouth were, and that she was not quite 3. And she said, "I wish I looked like that." And the irony is, she does. She's our recessive baby. So she's got blonde hair and blue eyes. And she does look that way. And it was really funny, but also very humbling to know that my own child, first of all, who has been raised with diversity, would say something like that. And to know that she really does look that way. And for her to say something like that made me realize that there are millions of kids who don't look that way and are feeling the same way. And so I thought, I mean, and I never realized that a doll like me would become a platform for advocacy. But I think very early on, I realized that it was. And what do we do? We do kids such a disservice when they can't see themselves in the places that matter, right? So in the books they read, in the movies that they see, in the TV shows they watch, I mean, wherever it is, the toys they play with, kids need to see themselves. And the flip side is kids that don't have those differences need to see them too. And we do such a disservice. And I think the toy world, I mean, that's the biggest marketing ploy for kids, right? Where do we reach kids? The world of toys. But they don't reflect, and it's been a very slow process. They don't typically reflect the kids that play with them.
You're absolutely correct. And so just in our family alone, we have Coop, who's from China and looks very Chinese. He also has Down syndrome. We have Nash, who has Down syndrome. We have Willow and Livy, who are our two amazing little girls we adopted through foster care that are little girls of color, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so they have just the most coolest hair ever. I think it's the most fun thing, and they love it too. And then we have our 4 children from Colombia that we adopted, and our 4 biological kids. So we have such an array and diversity within our own family. And you are so right. It is so difficult to be able to find something that they are going to attach to or that they're going to have just a connection to, I would say. I want to ask you about something in our preparation. I'm going to read this because I think this is very unique. And so I can tell that this is part of just who you are. And I think it stems back well into your childhood. And it's often, I believe it's because of this line that you shared. You said, way back in high school, I wrote an essay it's titled, "One Person Can Make a Difference." And then you ask a question, what did high school Amy know? Then you say, then in college, Amy wrote the same essay and said that one person making a difference was unrealistic. What did she know? Here you have Amy in high school saying, a person can make a difference. One person can make a difference in the world. And then college Amy saying, I know that it's unrealistic to think that one person can make a difference. Can you share with us about this story and this experience?
That's so funny because, right. And I think that I think in high school, I genuinely felt, and it's hard to know, did I really think writing the essay with that perspective? Because clearly the teacher had an agenda on that. Was that going to get me the better grade? To say yes. And I really couldn't prove the other way. But I think that you have this sense of, I can make a difference. And then I got to college and I was probably a little bit more cynical, had a little bit better writing skills. And I think I thought that's totally impossible. And it's funny because, and I tell my own kids that story too, because I think that I'm back in the high school position where I think you absolutely can make a difference. And it's funny because I did a story, and it's probably been 7 or 8 years ago. And it was kind of when a doll like me was ramping up a little bit in terms of people across the world were asking for them. Because again, where do you go to find a doll that has, unique hands or whatever it is? So I did this story, and I remember that the I saw a proof of it, and the headline read, "Mom makes dolls for girls suffering from self-esteem issues." And it was so offensive because I thought, first of all, they didn't interview me, and it was kind of like gathering information from what they thought. And it was a major paper. And I called the editor, and I was just like, that is so off the mark. Number one, I make dolls for girls and boys, but they're not suffering from self-esteem issues. This is something that we have put on them, right?
As a
Like, the
society.
onus is on us. What are
Yeah.
we as a community doing? And he laughed, and he said, and it was really condescending, and he said, "What do you want the title to be?" And I said, "Well, what do you want the story to be? Do you want the story to be, there's a mom making dolls at her dining room table? Or do you want the story to be, for the first time in these kids' lives, they're seeing a human likeness?" And he said, "We want the mom story." And I said, "That's too bad, because I think that you're missing an opportunity, and you're missing an opportunity to talk about the power of seeing yourself. And what's the bigger picture for these kids? Like, you literally have the chance to rewrite the narrative. Like, your words, and I mean, obviously the words in your headline are so off the mark. You can rewrite the story for these kids based on what you say." And he said, he laughed and said, "Do you really think your dolls have that kind of a worldwide impact?" And I thought that it was so, I mean, it blew me away, first of all, that he was that brazen, I think, about it. And I said, fortunately, I recovered very quickly and said, "I don't think my dolls have that kind of power, but I think that your words do.
Hmm. Wow.
And the way that you're talking about these kids is doing them a disservice." And so
Wow.
the title was changed, and it was kind of one of those things. The Associated Press actually picked up the story, and I totally resisted the urge to go back and say, would this be an appropriate time to say, "See," but it was, and now that the dolls have gone worldwide, I'm going back to, absolutely, one person has the power to make a difference, right? And you never know where your story is going to appear and whose ears it's going to fall on,
Yeah, you're
right?
absolutely right.
And I
I
think, oh, so go ahead.
I was going to
I think that
share.
you would resonate with the idea of everybody wants to make a difference. Right? We all say that, and there's a million reasons, and this totally resonates with your mission, your personal mission. We all want to make a difference, but we've got a million reasons not to, right? Like, I'm too busy, I'm broke, I'm old, I'm young, I'm disabled, I'm whatever it is. There's a million reasons not to, but sometimes there's one reason why you should.
Yeah,
And
that's
for
right.
this, it's going to be this little girl or whoever.
So I'm having such just clear thoughts around this work that you're doing and how inspired it actually is. A core belief of myself, a core belief of our organization is that everybody has a song they're meant to sing. We all have divine potential and a reason why we are here on this earth at this very time, entrusted with the circumstances that we are entrusted with, where we live, what we look like, abilities and, perceived disabilities are all entrusted to us for a very specific reason, to be able to fulfill our purpose, our reason for being here. Everybody has a purpose. But oftentimes, even though that divine potential exists within every single one of us, the person who is looking in the mirror doesn't feel that, and they don't see that, even though it is already there and it exists there. And I don't know why I had this thought come in my mind, but I'm going to share it. it reminds me what the work that you are doing reminds me so much of Dumbo's magic feather. Dumbo could fly all along. He had the potential to fly all along. And it wasn't until a wise friend gave him a feather that was really nothing more than a way to unlock that divine potential that existed in him, in his own mind, that he believed that he could fly. And as I go and I look at your Instagram page and I see these children opening this box and seeing a doll that is exactly like them, and that it makes them feel so special, and it helps them ultimately to be able to see and feel that divine potential. It's much like Dumbo's magic feather that's
I
unlocking
love that.
the superpowers and the abilities that have existed in them all along. And so that's the thought that I had as you were
I love
sharing
that.
that.
That's a great, I'm going to actually write that down after we finish talking. That's fantastic. I love that. And it's funny that you mentioned superpowers because I think often people say, Down syndrome is your child's superpower. And I don't know that it's not exactly the Down syndrome that is. And it's funny because I asked my oldest son, who is a Marvel buff, and I was like, tell me this, how do superheroes get their superpowers? Like, is it something that you're born with? And because that's not something that I totally understand, but I was like, I feel like there's something to that, right? And he said it's not necessarily something that you're born with, but it's what you do with, the gifts or the talents that you've been given that create it. And I love that. That's, what you're saying. All of this is already there. What are you going to do with it? Kind of a
That's right.
thing. And I think that no matter what, spiritual beliefs you have, it all is about, you have been given a gift and you have been given, I think, an obligation to use those gifts. What are you going to do with it? And for you, you are the channel through which so many of these stories are being told, that you're rewriting a narrative, and that's your channel. Mine happens to be sewing.
Yeah, well, it's a passion for you for sure, and it's a talent. Can you share with us, when was the first doll made? When was your very first doll made? What year was that?
Okay, that's probably like 40 years ago.
How about under this
But with a
idea?
doll like me, I think so. I was just making dolls just for fun. And this is how social media works, right? You never know who you're going to hit. A friend of a friend saw one of the dolls and thought it looked like her little girl, except that her little girl had had her leg amputated. And so she said, is there any way you'd consider making a doll like her?
Wow.
But without a leg. And I thought, and she said, we've looked everywhere for something like that. And I thought, absolutely. And this, again, this speaks to, we need to kind of break out of what our consciousness is. That was not in my consciousness, but it should have been, right? That should have been something I was thinking about. And so I did a doll for her and she shared it on social media. And so this was right around Halloween. So between Halloween and the Christmas holidays, I had 200 orders.
Wow.
Just for dolls.
From that one doll.
With limb differences. And so, because you think of like, your fingers, think about how many different ways there are to make a hand, right? Some kids have one finger, in this case, this little girl has two on this one, but none on this one. There's so many different ways to make that. And you were talking about adopting from China. It was shortly after I started making the dolls with limb and hand differences that a mom who had adopted a little girl from China with albinism reached out, and she was like, you're kind of like my last ditch effort in terms of trying to find somebody who would do this. And she said she has the Chinese features, but very pale skin, blue eyes, and blonde hair. Could you do that? And I was like, absolutely. And so that way it kind of opens up a new door to other families. And so it's, again, like when I talk about the dolls going around the world, I mean, I think that I've counted about 35 countries where the dolls have gone, because I think every parent wants something that they think might help their child feel seen. And
How
this
many
is a
dolls
great
have you
way.
guys produced?
Okay, so when you say you guys, I look around and my lab dog is laying on the floor, and I think that that's the crew right here.
So I've got to back up
Yeah.
because I'm just trying to do the math in my head. I mean, do you know how many dolls you have created?
I've sent probably over $1,200 around the
My
world.
goodness.
And I mean, obviously, it tends to be
And
most common in the US.
but this is just you, Amy.
It's just me.
You
Well, and
don't
so
have
my mom helps me so, thankfully. Um,
wow. See,
and
in
I've
my
hit
mind, I knew it was hundreds, but I didn't envision like just Amy doing that. But this is what you're doing. This is
That's
you.
why we're not sitting at my dining room table doing this interview, because it's just I don't we haven't eaten there in 10 years because
So
it's the sewing machine, it's fabric.
I apologize. My business mind kind of comes in more from just like a logistics standpoint. Are you keeping up with demand? Or I
And
can't
that's
imagine that you
honestly,
are.
I love talking about a doll like me. I could talk about it for hours. That's the part that is the hardest to talk about, is knowing there's a wait list.
Yeah.
And so
How big is
this
your
is
wait
10
list?
years. There's about $2,000 waiting.
Goodness, Amy.
And so
Wow.
my push in 2025 and beyond is to fundraise to afford help, to get people to help me, with the business side, because that's very labor intensive, and the assembly piece of this. I mean, because each doll is, you figure how many different, think about your
It's all,
kids, okay?
everyone is custom.
Right. Your
Every
family
doll is
alone
custom.
is probably how many different bolts of fabric? How many different colors would you guys, if you put your
Multiple.
arms in,
Yeah, a lot.
right? Everybody's slightly different tone.
That's right.
There's, every doll is custom made for that reason.
Amy, how long does it take to start to finish to complete one doll?
So this doll, for example, I could probably finish her in about 8 hours. Some of the dolls, there's one that I'm actually going to work on next, where the child has a brain tumor. And so she has across her, they had to open up her head. So she has a scar going from ear to ear, and then a couple in the back as well. And so that's a little bit longer. I mean, it's each doll is literally, people will say, can you have all the parts ready and ready to go?
You
And
can.
sometimes, yeah, sometimes I can, but then everybody is slightly different, right?
That's right.
Sometimes a
Everything
child
is
doesn't have an
completely
ear
custom. That's the
on this
magic
side,
behind it is every doll is completely custom to
right?
that unique, amazing angel that is going to receive it. And so more questions. And remind me, what year was it that you did your first custom doll? What year was it that
So
mom asked
it
you?
was 2014.
Okay.
So we are right at, or like, yeah, we're right at the cusp of like 10. I just hit 10 years,
Yeah. And with funding, I mean, these are not cheap.
right?
How does this work from a cost standpoint? If somebody requests a doll,
Right.
do they need to make a donation? Do they like what does all that look like?
So I A Doll Like Me is now a nonprofit. In So in 19, A Doll Like Me did become a nonprofit,
Wonderful.
because early on it didn't feel right to say, you're going through medical care, you're living in the Ronald McDonald House,
Hmm.
you likely have lost your job because you're caring for your kid. Also, this is going to cost you $100. It never felt right to
Totally.
say that.
Totally.
And so very early on, I would either not do a cost, or I started a GoFundMe for that reason. I remember there was a young man who was just out of college, and he was like, I would love to be able to pay for $3 for kids. And I thought, what a great idea. Like, this is something we could give a child on behalf of our global community. We've done you a real disservice, right? We don't put you in the places that matter, but here's where we're going to start. And so at that time, I had a newborn baby, and I was like, this is not the time to think about a nonprofit. And the publicity that came from the GoFundMe was the timing was just right. I think this speaks to, are we ever ready? Right? Would you have adopted those kids when you were ready? Are
No,
you ever ready? Right? Like, for such a leap of faith, are you ever ready? And so I just thought, this has to happen now because I have to. This has to be a gift. So the challenge has always remained, how do I fund these so that I don't have to go back to, look, this is going to cost you $100.
that's right.
Now, knock on wood, and I have a very, very understanding husband. He's a child psychologist, so he knows this is important. There's times when we're operating in the red because this is so important. So nobody since becoming a nonprofit has had to pay for their own doll. And there's times where, the equipment that the doll requires is well over $100. You're looking at a wheelchair, you're looking at AFO, the leg braces, you're looking at hearing aids, and any number of things that the child has that the doll needs. But I can't do it. I can't say to the family, there's a cost to this.
Amy, if you could wave your magic wand and have whatever it was that you envision and dream for this amazing cause that you have, what would that look like?
Good question. You threw me for a loop. What would it look like? I would be able to obviously meet the demand. And beyond that, I think that there are so many kids, and the deserve is not the correct word because all children deserve this. But I think that this is something that kids need. And not just, don't think I'm saying it's just my dolls. Kids need to look into the face of a doll and see their own, and are just the ones that's what I'm doing. But I think that I would be able to meet the demand that I have. And then on a bigger scale, this would be a concern for people, right? Or if we're going to look at physical health being equal to mental and emotional health, we've got to reach kids where they're at. And that's the toys that they play with. That is so powerful. So it needs to be more than we're going to concede to, okay, sure, we want to be inclusive and we want to represent kids. It's got to be more than lip service. I tell people one of the best stories at Christmas is Rudolph. And it's such a funny logic, the way, why do they accept Rudolph, right? He has a very obvious difference, but he has to prove himself and prove his worthiness to be accepted into his peer group and be accepted by adults. I mean, adults treat him horribly. And I find that too in the kids that I work with. Adults are so awful. These are really raw stories of children, and they shouldn't have to prove their worth to be able to see themselves in the places that matter. And I think that this is where your families that you interview and I really cross paths, is I believe that too.
Yes.
Your child is worthy, and they should be able to see themselves in the places that matter, and not because they have to prove their worth. They are already worthy.
Yeah.
So I would
couldn't
love to
agree
see
more.
that narrative too. And if it means that I'm doing that one doll at a time, that's my privilege to be able to do that, for sure.
So I see clearly this is so much more than a doll. This is a cause, this is a movement to be able to empower and unlock individuals who probably feel a little bit that the world is against them. They face it every single day, whether that's with a disability, a limb indifference, looking differently than their peers. It's something that every single day, every waking moment, that is at the forefront of their mind. And we've shared two amazing examples. In one, Dumbo and the magic feather that unlocks his ability to fly, that was always there all along, and Rudolph, who was made fun of, was treated poorly, when in all along he was actually the one with that special superpower that was ultimately going to save Christmas. And so I just feel that so strongly with individuals that have been entrusted with a difference, with something about them that causes them to stand out or that makes them different than the norm. And in all circumstances, these are superpowers. These are superpowers that can be unlocked for the good of others. The superpower that it is the ability to change hearts and to change minds, and the ability to be able to help us to see past the superficial things that seem so important to us as human beings, to see those things that are the most important to us, and that is our divine worth and our divine calling as individuals, and our ability to be able to fulfill those purposes that we've been fulfilled or on this earth at this very time in these unique circumstances to be able to fulfill. And so what a tremendous podcast that we've been able to record. I want to close with asking you one question, and I think you've actually answered this throughout the entire podcast, but I feel it is very important to ask you this, and that is, Amy, do you think that one person can make a difference in this world?
Absolutely. If I were to rewrite the essay today, I would tell you absolutely. So I believe that one of your questions asked, something similar. And of course, I do. And I think that we all can be that difference.
I know that because I'm witnessing it right now in front of me of an individual, one person at her kitchen table, making a difference for thousands of children throughout the world. So, Amy, you're an inspiration. You're doing an amazing job. Great work. Keep up the great work. My heart tells me that this is just the beginning for this idea and this movement, and that many, many amazing things are in your future for being able to continue this work. So thank you for being a guest on the show today.
Thank you. I so appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Conquering Your Clownfish. If you liked what we discussed on the podcast today and want to continue the conversation, please visit us at conqueringyourclownfish.com. And please don't forget to subscribe.